Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about the American League games from yesterday. Now diving into the National League. Got a couple, specifically Brewers versus Mets was very eventful for a couple reasons. You talk about the Mets coming off of that doubleheader from yesterday. They were able to benefit from winning game one so that they could have Luis Severino pitch the game for them. And ultimately, it was a fine line. It ultimately goes down as a quality start. 6 innings pitched, 8 hits, 2 walks, 3 earned runs, 3 strikeouts. Didn't feel great at the time. It definitely felt like the Brewers sort of let him off the hook in that first inning when he ran into a bunch of traffic. But, he ended up allowing runners in scoring position in the first 4 innings, I believe it was. So definitely not clean by any means. But ultimately, he was able to get himself out of these jams pretty well, all things considered. And, on the other end, it's not like you got an incredible pitching performance from Freddie Peralta. Now, obviously, a lot of controversy coming with that game, considering the fact that they ended up pulling Peralta after what I believe was 8 consecutive retired hitters. You can correct me in the comment section if I'm off base on the number exact. But, Peralta got off to a little bit of a shaky start, let the Mets right back into the game after the Brewers put up 2 in that first inning. But that being said, he sort of found his groove eventually, goes 4 innings, riding a hot streak only at 68 pitches, and they decide to make the move to pull him out of the game, Pat Murphy does, and that's sort of when the floodgates open for the Mets. Now, that being said, that 5th inning was going well for a good while for the Brewers, but ultimately, this Mets team just clearly doesn't know when to quit. And I say that in a good way, considering they're able to string together a couple, really gutsy plays where it was Jose Iglesias who beats out the pitcher to first base, as we're coming off of the game from Monday where it's Edwin Diaz not backing up first base and having that be costly for them. Seems like Iglesias from the dugout sort of learned his mental lesson of there are going to be opportunities if the pitcher doesn't cover, and that's exactly what he did. Flies down the first base line, able to get in for a single there. That ends up scoring Tyrone Taylor, and then from that place on, with 2 outs, the Mets, just as resilient as they are, Brandon Nimmo hits an infield single to load the bases, and then you have a couple consecutive hits from Vientos, and also JD Martinez coming off of the bench, somebody who's been in big moments throughout his career, especially in the playoffs. They rattle off a couple hits, and the Mets score 5 runs in that 5th inning, which I believe, according to an ESPN graphic that they threw up at one point during the day, that it was the most runs scored with 2 outs in a playoff game since 1988. And that was basically where, the Brewers were done for after that point. And Mets were able to sort of cruise through the remainder of the game there. Definitely a lot of people calling out Pat Murphy for that decision to pull Peralta. They've been aggressive in terms of pulling pitchers early in the past. It's worked for them. Let me know in the comment section what your thoughts were, because definitely going down as a controversial decision. But, the Mets, I said this yesterday, they just feel like they have the makings of one of those Team of Destiny vibes. Now, vibes can only get you so far. These players have to continue to produce, but they are up to this point, and being able to get it from a variety of different players, including going to your bench to, bring in JD Martinez in a big moment. You have the bottom of the order and Tyrone Taylor sort of making the play. And on the Brewers side of this, it's not all doom and gloom. I don't feel great about where they're at currently, but, at least if you're going to come out of this series with a moral victory. I know doesn't go down as an error, but we're talking about Jackson Chourio here. The fact that he was able to, it seemed like, rob Starling Marte of a home run, and then it was on that Tyrone Taylor double immediately after to sort of begin that fifth inning. That is a tough one for sure. And ultimately, you look at, what he was able to do. I think they said that he was the youngest player in MLB history to record 2 hits in a playoff debut. So, he clearly was ready for the moment, all things considered. I know the misplay in left field, a brutal one. But, Brew Crew, it's been a good season. I'm not trying to call curtains on it just now, but not feeling optimistic about them for sure. But, if you have hope, let us know why in the comments section. Other game of the night, though, last game of the day, Braves versus the Padres, and we got an absolute masterclass from Michael King in this one where he was unbelievable. And this is where, people are now sort of looking back to that Juan Soto trade, talking about who won. I think it was mutually beneficial. There's no need to sort of, tally points here. But getting to see Michael King have the success that he did, I think was, a real positive for not just Padres fans, but I think it was just really cool in general, getting to see him have this season where he takes on a bigger role as a starter for the Padres and gets the ball in game 1, and ultimately 7 innings, 5 hits, 0 walks, and 12 strikeouts. He is the 5th pitcher with 10 or more strikeouts, 0 runs, and 0 walks in a postseason game. And the Padres as a whole are the first team in MLB postseason history with 15 strikeouts and 0 walks in a shutout. So, this was a masterclass from the Padres pitching. Michael King was excellent. Finally, the Braves get a little bit of a breather getting away from Michael King, and in comes Jason Adam, and he was excellent as well. Does allow a hit, but ultimately 3 strikeouts to get out of that, and it was just sort of wraps from there. And the reality is, you look at the starting pitching matchup of Michael King to the Braves on the other side, where it was AJ Smith-Shawver, who hasn't been in the major leagues basically the entire season, called him up from the minors because of the struggles they're dealing with from an injuries perspective with their starting rotation. And, he was not good, objectively speaking. He got hit around, didn't last 2 innings for them. Really shouldn't have been all that much of a surprise at the end of the day there. But the Braves didn't lose this game because of the pitching. Now, would have been nice for them to, have a more reliable front-end pitcher. It's a very tough situation for Smith-Shawver to come into that situation in a juiced Petco Park for, the first time in years, at least in a playoff setting, that is. And, have the towels swinging in his face. And, it seemed electric in the ballpark there. That's a tough situation for him to walk into. Obviously, it would have been nice to have somebody like Chris Sale in that situation, but that's just the way that, the cards were dealt for the Braves in this situation. And, all things considered, the bullpen was shut down from there on out, and they were able to give you a scoreless 6 2/3 innings from a bullpen position. And it was Snitker himself who said that they didn't lose this game because of who was pitching for them. It was about the fact that they just could not touch Michael King in this game. And ultimately, it was really just the damage that was done in that first inning for the most part. I mean, I know the public perception of Fernando Tatis is, a little bit polarizing, I guess would be the right word for it. But, I mean, when that dude smacks home runs to the extent that he did, going 415, an absolute no-doubter. Like the ball coming in on his hands and him just being able to take it to, Neverland. It's an awesome atmosphere, and it was just such a cool moment. First home run of the postseason. I don't know. I've definitely, from a mutual perspective, I think the Padres are a lot of fun to root for. I understand, the whatever stuff on the side. Fernando Tatis is an extremely fun baseball player. That's a fact. So, those 2 runs early on in the game are really what did the Braves in this game. And, they get a little bit of insurance as well as the game moves along as well. They get a couple RBIs from Kyle Higashioka. It was the sac fly in the second inning to build up that 3-0 lead, and then Higashioka again hits a solo shot in the 8th to be able to provide a little bit more padding there. But I thought it was a fun game. I thought that it was a really resilient game for the Braves, all things considered, coming off of the doubleheader, knowing that you were down as much pitching as you were. That's a lineup that's sort of exhausted. I think it's at least worth noting that Michael Harris, who everybody was sort of pinning as somebody who really, and it's not even that people were pinning, he had not performed in the postseason up until yesterday, where he hit singles in his first 2 at-bats. Now, ultimately, that's not the stuff of legends, but it's a good performance. And I think that ultimately, that's the type of stuff you need to see. Michael Harris, been important for them in that leadoff spot this season, especially considering all of the other injuries that they've been dealing with up to this point. And you look and, it was some of the other guys. 3 strikeouts for Ozuna, including in that 8th inning when, maybe there was a little bit of a chink in the armor, or I think that's the phrase. But that situation where Ozuna stepped up to the plate with Jason Adam on the mound, 1 man on in front of him, and just wasn't able to make any sort of noise, where he really struggled in this game. Ozzy Albies, also struck out 3 times. There was a lot of striking out in this game, of course, the 15 combined from King and Adam. So this was, sort of all Padres, but at the same time, I don't think that it's entirely the sky is falling for the Braves, where they hung in there in terms of a pitching perspective. And that was the number one concern. Their offense also battered, but you have a number of names there that have at least been there before. And all things considered, there is a fair amount of inexperience on the Padres side, not top to bottom. They're obviously, kind of hired guns in some sorts, where they aren't, homegrown Padres players. You go out, you get Narvaez, you get Manny Machado, Xander Bogaerts, some people that have been in the majors for a while and do have some postseason, appearances. But that being said, I don't think the Braves are totally dead in this one. I picked the Padres coming into it anyways, and I do feel like that's how it ends up. But, going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, as we are going to be sort of shifting gears back to the NFL as we do our weekly segment, talking about each team that lost, or not each team, but a handful of the prominent NFL teams that lost during their week 4 games. We have our panic meter scale of 1 to 10 from how nervous fans of these teams should be following their team's loss this past weekend. So that's what we're going to be diving into next. But before we do so, we do have to take a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.